Okay, today we're going to talk about basic interpersonal skills. Of course, we've been talking about this all along, but today we're going to talk about how to actually promote warmth, empathy, respect, and genuineness. We've talked about this before, but now we're going to get a little bit more specific about this. And so we're getting close. We're actually getting close to starting to interact with our clients. A good professional must accurately observe their clients, and this is something that I talk about all the time with whether I'm in this class or whether I'm in another class. Reading people, you have to read people, you have to observe what they look like, what's going on with their faces, with their body language. We get a lot more information from body language than we do from the words that they actually say. It's easy to lie, but it's hard to lie with your physical person. Actors can do it sometimes, but it's really very difficult for people to lie as far as their body language is concerned. So we need to accurately observe. We need to effectively attend to this individual. In other words, we need to show them that we have positive feelings toward what they're saying, toward what their situation is. And in order to do that, we need to attend to them. We need to effectively attend to them. And when we talk about how we do that, it's kind of an interesting situation because you're showing them that they're the most important person to you. I think I told you guys the story of John Travolta. He's a Scientologist? Mm-hmm. Okay. He's fascinating because he's always trying to convert people to his religion, which is really odd. Well, or not that odd, I guess. People do that all the time. But the way they teach people who are Scientologists is to focus on this select individual. Focus on the select individual exclusively. And if they don't respond to you, then they don't exist anymore. As far as their religion is concerned, you're either part of the religion or you're subhuman. So that's just the way it works. And so my son was at a party with John Travolta, and John Travolta came up and asked him if he was a member of the Church of Scientology. And of course, I raised my kid as a non-spiritual individual. I raised him as a non-religious person, and so it's really difficult to talk to him as far as religion is concerned. He said, "No, I'm not a Scientologist." He said, "Well, are you a Catholic?" And that whole thing. And as soon as my son said no to everything, it's like a switch flipped off in his brain. He wouldn't attend to him at all. As a matter of fact, he looked away, and he never looked at him again, as if he had ceased to exist. Which is not the way to attend to people. When you effectively attend to people, you need to look them in the eye, look at their faces anyway. You don't have to look in their eyes, but you need to effectively attend to them, of course. And you need to actively listen. And actively listen means that basically it means that you're listening to what they're saying, not thinking about what you're going to say to them. So active listening has to do with that. Observing means noticing all behaviors that accompany communication. This type of communication is known as nonverbal communication. Of course, you're looking at the facial expressions. But of course, when we're dealing with facial expressions, if we're dealing with different cultures, then potentially you're dealing with a different set of facial expressions that may mean something totally different. As we learned last year in cultural psychology, the Japanese, what they say isn't as important as what their facial expression is. So they read facial expressions far more than they read the words that you're talking, that you're saying. The Japanese will never disagree with anything. They're taught that is rude. To say no is rude. So they don't say no. They say yes, but they say yes in a way that their facial expression tells you that it's really no. So they never ever say no. Which gets really confusing if you're an American GI and you're trying to pick up a Japanese chick and she's you make suggestions and she just keeps saying yes. And of course you understand, well, no you don't, that's the problem. If you don't understand that in this case yes means no, then you've got a really serious problem because, and that kind of stuff happens all the time in Japan with American GIs. They had to move the Marine base off of Japan for that very reason, because they were having problems with sexual assault and rape. Of course, it was sexual assault and rape from the Japanese to the Marines. It was just seduction, and they didn't really understand what was going on because of the different cultures. We're reading facial expressions. Okay, so reading facial expressions is very important. Breathing patterns, like if they're sighing or whatever's going on with them. This is how I communicate with my wife. If I'm exasperated about something, I sigh and she goes, oh, is there something wrong? You know, one of those kinds of things. I'm not saying I'm really pissed off and this is really upsetting me. We harvested the apples, and we harvested our apples last Friday, and we got 38 gallons of apple cider out of it. Sound pretty good?
Yeah.
38 gallons in gallon containers, and she put it in the back of the truck. Well, last week was the hottest week they've ever had in September in Iowa. It was 94 degrees. She was so tired after she finished harvesting the apples that she took a nap. And when she came back outside, all the gallons of 38 gallons of cider had exploded in the back of the truck. I know. That's a really messy bit of a truck. It's also 38 wasted gallons of apple cider. So then she tried to salvage what she could, and she just made this god-awful mess. I'm glad I'm not there. So when she was telling me about it, of course, I haven't had any apple cider for 2 years. We didn't get a crop last year. So now I don't get any apple cider again, it sounds like. The way apple cider works, it's raw, so it's got bacteria in it, and it ferments. It turns hard. So you have to slow the bacteria down. How do you slow the bacteria down? Well, you have to freeze it. You have to freeze your apple cider almost right away, instead of leaving it out in the bed of a truck for the 94-degree heat. I don't know what the hell was going on in her mind. Anyway, so I was sighing to my wife, and she thinks that I'm pissed off. I'm not as pissed off now. What the hell? I mean, last year we didn't get any apple cider either, so. So what? I was going to bring some apple cider out here, but it looks like we're not going to get any. Whatever's out there is fermented. It's turning hard. Oh well, not important. Breathing patterns, gestures, of course. Whatever gestures you happen to make. I guess the gestures I'm making now are showing how frustrated I am with my wife and her. I've got to go take a nap. Movement, of course. What kind of movements are going on in posture? I've got a quick story. And this is kind of a sexual story. So, I'm sorry.
I have a comment about gestures.
Gestures, yes.
I was once told that your body gestures speaks louder than anything.
That is true. That's true. You cannot lie. Your body doesn't lie. Your mouth may lie, but your body doesn't. Okay. Once upon a time, this is the first time I ever counseled anybody. And I was counseling a lady. How can I explain this? Let's see. Very attractive young lady, and she was relatively buxom. If you know what buxom means she's large-chested. Anyway, okay, so she's sitting across from me, and of course I've read all this crap, and I know that in order to attend to people, you've got to sit squarely toward them, and you have to face them. You need your legs apart to some extent, so that they can see that you're open to whatever they're saying. Okay, so I'm counseling this lady. I've come in contact with her a couple times. She's got a couple really interesting problems. At this point, I didn't really know what her problems were. So she's got long hair, and she comes to the counseling session in a sundress. Okay, she's got a sundress on. You know what a sundress is?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you getting the picture? Buxom lady, long hair, with a sundress on. Okay. And the sundress comes right to her knees. But when she sits down, it hikes up a little bit. But we're not going to even think about that. We're not even talking about that because I'm making eye contact with this lady. And so we start talking. It turns out that she's married to a guy and he won't leave her alone. What a surprise. He's married to this. It was when I was in the military. So she's married to a pilot, and the pilot won't leave her alone. He chases her all over the house, and he just won't leave her alone. And this is what she was complaining about initially. Okay, so she's sitting across from me. We're about a foot apart, and she's over there, and I've got my legs not wide open, but I've got my legs relatively showing that I'm open to whatever she's saying, and so she does exactly the same thing. Well, that's not right. She's female, she's wearing a sundress, it's hiked up above her knees, and she's got her legs spread relatively apart, and I'm thinking, well, this is kind of odd. You're complaining about your husband harassing you, sexually harassing you, and you're sexually harassing me. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it gets worse. So I'm talking to her, making eye contact with her, and all of a sudden she says, "Oh, my hair, the back of my neck." This is Lubbock, Texas, my back of my neck. And so she flips her head down like this, her hair over her head. Of course, it's flipping onto my lap, her hair that's that long, and then she just flips it back. Okay. So she's bending over like this, and she's flipping her hair back. And so she does that the first time, and I've got eyes about this big. I'm trying to maintain eye contact because all of a sudden I've got her legs like that, and she's been over. It's a Sunday. So you can imagine what's going on. So as the conversation, of course, I'm trying to maintain the conversation, and she just keeps flipping her hair. She just keeps flipping her hair. She bends over and she flips her hair. So I'm getting quite a, well, except I'm making eye contact, of course. I'm not seeing anything else. I'm not watching her skirt hike up slowly. All of this is being filmed. This is one of my first counseling sessions, and all this is being filmed. So, and unbeknownst to me, the guy that is running the camera is focusing on her body rather than her face. So all of a sudden, we're getting a knee shot, we're getting a chest shot, and so, and of course, I don't have any idea what's going on back in the video room. So as the counseling session went on, we were about 15 minutes into it, and my legs had started out in a normal position, and by the time about 15 minutes, my knees are pressed together as tight as they can possibly be. But she's still flipping her hair, she's still bending over, and her skirt's still hiking up farther and farther and farther. Of course, I had seen this lady in a bicycling outfit, so it was really tight, spandex, the whole thing. Everything was really, really tight. So by the end of the session, not only did I have my arms crossed, but I had my legs crossed as well. I was trying to protect myself, and they, as you can imagine. So of course we're talking about facial expressions and gestures and movement and posture. And of course the whole time this lady is she trying to seduce me? Is that what's going on? Is that... That was the question I was asking. And then when we replayed the video, they only replayed it the one time because the guy that was running the camera had focused on her chest and her slowly exposing knees. It's worse than that because afterwards, and I just blew the counseling session all to pieces. I mean, they ripped me up one side and down the other. Oh, you're not open to expression. You should have said this. You should have done that. And of course, I'm just totally destroyed. I go outside later, and she's on the swing. Remember, this lady's got a sundress on, and she's on the swing, and she's swinging back and forth right in front of the pilot dorms. She's on this swing, and I'm going, oh my God. So the problem that she complained about was the fact that her husband wouldn't leave her alone. Well, the truth was that Well, it got into a really messy situation. What her situation was, she was a mama's boy, or I'm sorry, she was a daddy's girl. She was a daddy's girl. She was a daddy's girl, and she married this guy because her father had died, and so she was looking for a father figure, and so she assumed that he would treat her like her father did. But of course, his idea was completely different. He was a good pilot. He just wanted to have sex. Anyway, eventually, it was really kind of interesting. Eventually, she divorced her husband, and eventually she married somebody else. She didn't want to have children, and she's got like 5 kids now or something. But finally, she found the man that she was looking for. I'm not exactly sure who it was. It certainly wasn't me. But the way that she controlled people was through her sexuality. And she was very attractive, and she was, relatively well-proportioned individual. And she would wander around in bicycling clothes. What did she think? She's wearing spandex, and she's got the tightest top on that you've ever seen, zipped all the way down to her below her cleavage. What does she think is going to happen next? Does she think that men are in control of themselves? And the answer is, she did, but that's not true at all. And I had the toughest time. She was, the reason that I was working with her is because she had been seeing one of our doctors, and our doctor suggested that I talk to her. Turns out the doctor was having an affair with her. I know. Yeah, you have a question? Or are you just shut?
In that type of situation, as a counselor, would you rather not show off your nonverbal communication as far as, how you said you're kind of closing off and your arms are closed and your body language just said I'm
right.
abstaining from this basically.
Right.
Is that best in that situation to not show your nonverbal communication as far as keeping it professional and writing that you're observing, or?
Right. Well,
I mean, everyone's different as far as.
Right.
I'm not saying confident level, but as far as I guess not letting the patient know. Like, what would you suggest there as far as?
As far as this situation was concerned, the people that were telling me what to do afterwards told me that I should have maintained my open gestures. And I'm guessing that if I had done that, then she would have gotten more and more obvious. But I was reacting to her the way that she wanted me to react to her. She wanted me to react by protecting myself, and that's exactly what happened. I was trying to maintain a professional situation, and if I had ignored her, she would have just gotten more and more outrageous with her gestures, which would have made the cameraman happy, but it certainly didn't help our counseling session. Eventually we got to the point, and I continued to counsel her, not in counseling sessions, but I continued to counsel her, and eventually we got to the point where she wasn't doing that anymore. She came over to my house one night in her bicycling clothes. She was an officer's wife. So she'd never seen enlisted housing before, so she came into my house. Of course, I've got 2 kids and whatnot. I wasn't married at the time. But she came into my house and she was jumping up and down on the bed, and I'm like, it was, that's the way she controlled men, was through her sexuality. By her outrageous sexuality. But her sexuality, of course, wasn't mature sexuality. It was teenage, adolescent sexuality, where they just kind of show themselves off, but they don't expect anything to happen. And that's, of course, what she was doing. It was all, pseudo-innocent sexuality, which was really kind of strange. But eventually we got to the point where I could counsel her, and she didn't try to do anything outrageous. The reason that she allowed that to happen was because she started having an affair with the doctor. Here she was, and the doctor was, her her husband was a Greek god, you know, this guy's gorgeous, and he marries this gorgeous woman, thinking, you know, we're going to have gorgeous children, wonderful sex all over the house. And as it turned out, that's not what she wanted. She was looking for a father figure. I was only in my late 20s at the time. Is that right? Yeah, I was only in my middle 20s at the time. So I was certainly not a father figure, despite the fact I had 2 children. But she was looking for an older man to take care of her, the same way her father did. And eventually she found the ideal man, which was very similar to her father, I guess. Anyway, yeah, she didn't really want to be married to that Greek god. She wanted to find somebody that was older than her who would take care of her. And then she would allow herself to be given to him. I mean, she was a very, very sexual person. Obviously, she's doing all these strange teenage things to entice men, but not to seduce men. It's really kind of an odd situation. Okay, so what were we talking about? We're talking about all of these things and reading all of these things. So the answer is there was no answer to my question. Well, you get a question.
So how did you figure out she needed a father figure?
We needed to get into conversation because I had no clue what was going on as far as she was concerned. The first counseling session, I tried to delve into her past to find out what it was. She was complaining about her husband, oh, the other day I got out of the shower and I was just wearing a towel and he tried to rip it off of me and he's chasing me throughout that, you know, that kind of thing. I'm going, wait a minute, there's a disconnect going on here. We need to discuss why it is that you try to entice me. And then obviously she did it's fairly obvious what she was doing. But the funny thing was, the 2 guys, and this was a training session, counseling session, and the 2 guys that were theoretically training me didn't catch any of this stuff. And so, you know, that's what I was trying to get at when I was talking to her. And so I flunked the counseling session, but later on, I found out that I was correct, that there was a lot of stuff going on with this lady. And of course, they were just focusing on me rather than on her. They weren't watching what she was doing. That she could have done anything that she wanted. As a matter of fact, she practically did anything. But we saw it all on the film later. They destroyed the film. It was so sexually explicit that they destroyed the film because for that and the fact that I really blew the session out of the water. I messed up. Okay, I didn't do a very good job. As far as they were concerned, but the reality was I'm not exactly sure I could have done a better job. I'm not exactly sure anybody could have done a better job. They suggested that she only see female counselors, but I don't think she would have done it. I don't think she would have gone to talk to a female counselor because she needed to feel empowered, and the way that she was empowered was by using her sexuality to intimidate males, which worked on me. Well, she sure intimidated me. I was trying to protect myself. I was trying to be a good counselor. I had myself covered up so good she couldn't have gotten to any of my body parts, even if she tried. I was completely protected. I was armor plated at that point. Normally, you don't have to do that with a client, but in this case, of course, I did. I know, I'm such a weenie, I guess. Being a good observer increases understanding of what clients are communicating. It can supplement and of course, this was my first counseling session. So I may be rationalizing what happened. I'm telling you exactly what happened. I'm telling you exactly what we saw. But I may be rationalizing. If I had handled it differently, things may have turned out differently. If I had handled it differently, it may have been me having sex with her instead of the doctor. I wasn't married at the time. Okay. I was in between wives. But that's not what I wanted, of course. I wanted to help her, and I knew that she had problems. I knew that she had such serious problems that anybody that got a hold of this lady in the future was in danger. Because she was a mess. She was really a mess. I mean, here's this lady that she marries this guy. She has this, $20,000 wedding. She marries the perfect guy, and then she won't let him touch her. What's going on here? What's this all about? Being a good observer increases understanding of what clients are communicating. It can supplement what your client is telling you verbally. It may verify what is being said, or it may contradict it. And of course, it's the contradictions that you're looking for. Usually, people can't lie with their bodies, but they can lie with their mouths. And you can tell by looking at what they're doing, as in this case, this lady was going, she was displaying herself sexually, yet at the same time she was complaining about her husband not leaving her alone. I had seen her before, I had interacted with her before, and she had always seemed very enticing, or trying to entice males. She always wanted to be very attractive to the extent that she wore spandex biking shorts all the time. Well, I'd only seen her in spandex biking shorts. This is the first time I ever saw her with any clothes that actually covered her. And then she was bending over and hiking up her skirt. It was really kind of funny. But the weird part was when she was on the swing afterwards. Remember, the thing only came up to her knees. Now, how in the world are you going to swing without displaying something while you're flipping back and forth? In front of the pilot, that was the bizarre part. This is it was a play area in front of the pilot's dorm. And here she was, an adult on a child's swing, swinging back and forth in a sundress. What's this all about? All of this sent a message. But of course, as male, we're not getting the message. This lady's got a really serious problem. She's trying to seduce people, and at the same time, she's acting like she's untouchable. So what's going on here? Obviously, there's a problem. But as a male, you're just watching her displaying herself as all you're seeing. So, and that's what she wanted. She wanted control. She wanted that kind of control. Really kind of wanted. As I said, eventually everything turned out okay. She stopped having an affair with the doctor, who was actually having an affair with one of the nurses that I was supposed to be dating at the time. Oh my goodness gracious.
Going in circles.
I know. Military people, you can't control them. They're just out of control. Anyway, that doctor, I swear. Turned out that later it turned out that the doctor was pushing drugs. So, I mean, it's just a mess. The only person that turned out okay was me. Okay, so sometimes it can contradict it. All right. If a practitioner gets conflicting messages, the nonverbal meaning is usually closer to the actual meaning. Practitioners often comment on the contradictions, and of course, this is a really good way to start your counseling sessions. By talking about the contradictions in the way that they act and the way that they are, what they're saying. These are things that you need to point out, because a lot of times they're trying to hide something. They can hide something verbally, but it's very difficult for them to hide anything physically. So you'll see their facial expressions, you'll see the way that they're standing, and of course, you'll see that all of this is contradictory. And now you can talk about it. Good observers pay special attention to facial expressions. Facial expressions can show any emotion, of course. If the client shows no emotion, known as a flat affect, it may indicate depression. And of course, that's what we're seeing here in this face. This is John Hinckley Jr., the man who tried to assassinate President Reagan. And of course, he was in a mental hospital. He's been released now. now that Reagan's been dead for, I don't know, 15 years or so, we have released this individual from the mental hospital. He was one of the only inmates at St. Elizabeth's in Washington, D.C. Anyway, you can see how depressed he seems. He was madly in love with Jodie Foster, who had never met the guy, evidently. Was confusing. Other indicators of depression include little body movement and slumped posture. Really kind of important, because depression is one thing and sadness is totally different. Sadness has a lot more physical reaction to it. Sadness, the individual will actually cry. People that are depressed rarely cry, mainly because they don't have the energy to do it. If they're sad, they will sigh, like I was sighing the other day when I found out I didn't have any apple cider. It was actually yesterday. So she does it on Friday. She presses all the apples on Friday. And evidently she just left it out in the truck all day yesterday. I mean all day Saturday, because she was so tired. And the temperature's in the middle 90s here with all of my apple ciders cooking. I know, she ruined 38 gallons of apple cider. Man. Okay, crying, sighing, looking down, of course, increasing the amount of fluid in a person's eyes because they may cry. But this is sadness as compared to depression. Depression, they don't cry. They don't cry. If they're crying, you know that they're just sad. And that's okay, that's better. People commit suicide when they're depressed. They don't commit suicide when they're sad, usually. So as long as there's some kind of a reaction, then at least you know that they're not going to hurt themselves. Potentially they're not going to hurt themselves, which can be a good thing if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for the possibility of suicide. Stress is expressed by muscle tension, movement, and shallow breathing. Looking away may indicate thinking, remembering, or being hesitant about talking. Now remember, this lady was trying to distract me by flipping her hair over her head. But those of us who understand the interactions between males and females know that if a female is doing anything with her hair, it's a seductive move. How about that? I can say that, can I? And this lady was flipping her hair over, and she had strawberry blonde hair. It wasn't the hair that was really distracting me. It was the fact she was bending over when she did it. I told you she was kind of chesty, didn't I? Okay. Yeah, that was, and of course her hair was flopping in my lap, which was, okay.
So what was your impression after your counseling was over?
I was scared. I was scared. You know, I didn't want to react to this lady. I'm trying to counsel her. I'm trying to talk to her. And I knew she had all kinds of problems. Otherwise, she wouldn't be trying to seduce me. And the lady was probably, I'm 5'6", 5'7". She was about 5'4", 5'5". She's a little bit tall for me. So I knew that she wasn't trying to seduce me. I'd met her husband. I played ball against her husband. Her husband was powerful. This guy was like, 250, 6'4" and 250. You know, I can imagine she had a hard time fighting him off. Or she probably didn't want to fight him off. That was the, well, it's just a really complicated situation. I know. She kept flipping her hair. Wow. I survived, and she got better, but it didn't have a whole lot to do with me. What really got to her was the fact that she had the affair with the doctor, and that really messed her up, because she thought he was a father figure, and he turned out to be not a father figure. He was just a serial seducer is what he was. And of course, that's not what she was looking for. She was looking for somebody to take care of her. And this guy can't even take care of himself. Clenched fists must be interpreted by the context of the situation and may indicate stress, frustration, anger, or anxiety, depending on what they're talking about. Clenched fists. Clenched fists doesn't mean that they especially want to punch you. It probably has to do with anxiety that they're feeling. A lot of times when people feel powerless, they will clench their fists. And that's because, well, they wish that there was something physical they could do about this situation. When I found out about my apple cider, I don't know that I clenched my fist, but I had nothing, there was nothing I could do about it anyway. So since it's all gone, you know, why in the world cry over fermented apple cider? It's not going to do me any good. She's in Iowa and I'm here. If I'd been there, I could have taken care of the situation. She just had made one bad decision after another. And this is a colonel, you know, you don't expect a colonel to make bad decisions. She really messed up my apple cider. The counselor must remember that gestures are culturally developed, and so that is something that you have to understand. So if we were dealing with somebody from somebody that was a Hopi or somebody that's from another culture, is it possible that their gestures would be different from the Dene gestures that are made?
Yes.
I don't know. I only talked to one guy that was a Hopi. He seemed to not move as much or gesture as much. It was almost like everything was more controlled. Does that make any sense? Has anybody ever have you had conversations with Hopis before? Do they
Yeah.
gesture as much as we ever?
I have, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Because my niece, I have 3 nieces who are Hopi.
Okay.
And they have they don't make a lot of hand gestures like nowadays. They're
Right.
just really, like you said, they're more controlled. They just sit there and they just talk.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't realize until you said that. I had to think about it.
Yeah, not as many hand gestures. It's the same way in Europe. If you're around Italians or French, they're big with, you know, flipping their hands all over the place. But if you talk to the English, everything's under control. That's interesting. I just wasn't exactly sure. The guy that I talked to didn't make any hand gestures at all. You know, he wasn't doing anything. And I make hand gestures all the time. I got my hands in my pockets, I'm playing with something, you know. I'm doing something with my hands, and here this guy just kind of sat there with his fingers crossed. It's really interesting, thank you. Yeah, so we need to be aware of their culture and the fact that their culture may be different than yours. One of the problems that we have in the United States is that, how can I say this? People think that all Indians are alike. Okay. I know, there's over 560 tribes, and each tribe is different. Some of them have similarities, but the reality is you never know what you're going to be running into. In Nebraska, they have, the Winnebago, the Ho-Chunk is one group. They have one reservation, and then they have the Dakota. They have another reservation, and of course the Dakota Sioux are not the same as the Ho-Chunk. They both speak a similar language, interestingly, but they have their own casinos, and they have their own gestures, and they have their own headdresses. They have their own regalia that they wear at powwows, and they're not completely different, but they're relatively different. So, and they would be very different from anything that you would see down here. If you go to a powwow, and I don't know if you guys go to powwows, but if you go to powwows, one of the things you're going to notice is if there is a Crow there, somebody who is from the Crow tribe, those individuals wear a Crow bustle, and it's black feathers in their bustle. Other tribes mostly wear hawk or eagle feathers for their bustles, but the Crow they wear black feathers for a bustle, and they also wear their hair in a pompadour. which nobody else will do because we won't get into that. Okay, anyway. People are different. So the point is people are different. You need to understand the difference between one person and the next. When somebody experiences strong emotions, their skin tone may change color, darkening, or looking rosier than usual. Now, if you think that, well, I'm counseling an African American, they're real dark anyway. I can't tell the difference between, I don't know when they're pale, I don't know when they're excited, I can't tell. Well, the reality is their skin tone will change as well. They don't have to be, pasty white in order to see embarrassment from them. You can see embarrassment in anybody's skin. It changes tone. It also changes volume to some extent. With all the red, it actually swells to a minor extent, not very much. It just swells a little bit. So you can tell if somebody's embarrassed. They don't have to be white in order to read that. Skin tone change usually starts at the chest and moves up to the face, which is fascinating. I knew that my wife was attracted to me because anytime she talked to me, she would start turning red. And the red started underneath her collar and it moved up to her chin and then into her cheeks. So I knew that she was attracted to me. And I could read that. I'm really smart that way. So I knew that she was attracted to me. Which is kind of funny. Because, of course, we were in the military. She was my boss. And I had a first sergeant that was very protective of his lieutenant. And so anytime she came into he would follow her all around, making sure that nobody messed with her. And so when she came into my shop and started talking to me, he'd say, "Are you okay? Is there something wrong? Are you okay?" But every time she talked to me, she'd flush. She would flush, and I knew that she liked me a little bit anyway, for some reason. Facial expressions, what emotion do you seem to be displaying? Do you have tears in your eyes? This is really important. As I said, the more tears you have, if you're depressed, you're not really going to have tears in your eyes, but if you're sad, you will have tears in your eyes. Is the mouth turned up or is the mouth turned down? If you're happy, the corners of your mouth will turn up. If you're unhappy, the corners of your mouth will turn down. Is the brow wrinkled? That means you're thinking. That means you're upset. That can mean a lot of different things. If it's just flat, this is more like a flat expression. Are there circles under your eyes? Of course, if you're as old as I am, you've always got circles under your eyes. And are you smiling? Sometimes we try to hide our emotions by smiling all the time. And of course, that's a good way to do it. People will misinterpret the smile. Most people, when they look at you, it's relatively superficial. They're not really trying to read your expressions. But as a counselor, of course, we have to. Because we're trying to determine whether what they're saying is what they mean or whether there's a contradiction between the way they look and what they're saying. That's our job. But as some people don't notice anything. Over the weekend, a guy, this is in Nashville, I think. Nashville Police Department. A guy went into a church and started shooting people. Okay. You would think somebody would see him before he went into the church and see that he was pissed or something was going on with him and ask him if everything was okay. But here he went past all of these people, went into the church. Well, I guess he was going into the church when the lady he wanted to kill came out and he shot her and killed her. And then he went in and just started popping away at people. And eventually, of course, he wounded 6 people, pulled off, 12 or 13 shots, and then they stopped him. But you would think that people would notice this kind of thing. If somebody's upset, you would think that somebody would see that. I told you the story about driving down the road and seeing the guy with the rifle under his coat. But it wasn't as much the rifle as it was the expression on his face. He was angry. I could tell that he was angry just by looking at his face. It was raining, but that rain doesn't make you that angry. I knew that there was something wrong. And that's why I turned around and came back. He had a rifle and he was pissed. And so, you know, what's the probability something negative is going to happen next? Fairly high. You would have thought somebody would have noticed this stuff. But we ignore people. We don't look at their faces. We pass them in the hallway and we don't give a rat's, whatever, tail. I didn't say ass. I was thinking rat's ass, okay.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I had a funny story about Mr. Bigman, the board regent president, and it's the first time I met him, and we had examined one another obviously, and it was funny because I was taking one of the classes and I just wanted to see the caliber of work of someone who's very professional like that. And it was the first time I met him. I shook his hand and we were like, we stood there for probably about a good 15, 20 seconds just examining each other, like as far as gestures.
Trying to read it, yeah.
Yeah, and like it was funny because at split second we had noticed that we were doing it to one another. We were kind of like looking at one another, and we kind of just but noticed and realized that we're doing it to one another. And like stopped for a little bit, and it was funny because that was one of the first times that I had done that, or had, as far as doing that. Because a lot of people, their first impression of me is like, they think that I'm gay, and it's really funny because I was kind of thinking in the back of my mind, like, man, I just got to think that I'm checking them out, or I'm thinking that, because I started freaking out inside my head. I'm like, oh crap, I just got, I don't think that I'm doing this to him as student body president and him as board regents president. So all these things started going through my head. But it was funny how you mentioned that not a lot of people do that to one another. They don't really look at one another. It's usually if they're talking, they're usually looking in a different direction or either doing it. But it's very rare to see someone actually making eye contact with you and trying to do that. And while maintaining their facial expressions.
He's a Marine too, isn't he?
I don't know.
I think he was, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't think he was prime military.
I think the other thing would be that we as people are not too confrontational unless we are able to detect something that is extremely, like you had mentioned, the possibilities of a person bringing in a weapon or something, that case scenario. It's like people will wait until the last second for them to react to something. That's just how we are as human nature right now. Whenever we do that, I think that behavior probably needs to change.
Well, with the more dangers we have out there, it seems like this kind of stuff's happening every day.
It's what, yesterday, the church shooting?
Yeah. In Nashville. Yeah, but why didn't anybody see this? Do we really ignore everybody completely? And I think the answer is yes. We do. We live so much in our social media world that we don't live in the real world. Yes, ma'am.
I think society is becoming more, I don't care about anybody
Except myself.
except yourself.
There you go.
Because I've been around different people at different times, and over the Labor Day, I had an opportunity to go out west for a while. And there's a lot of people out there who are so self-absorbed,
Sure.
they have no clue what's going on in the rest of the world or even another person.
Right.
And that's sad.
Yeah, and some people only live in one place. They only live here, and they think that that's the only place there is. So they don't really care about...
the only good place.
The only good place. Well, I was talking to somebody this weekend. My son lives in Florida, and he got blasted by the hurricane. And he escaped, of course. He evacuated like he was told that he needed to do. But last week they didn't have school. He's a teacher, and they didn't have school for a whole week. They start back today. But I was talking to somebody this weekend. He didn't even realize there had been a hurricane that devastated Florida. I just sent my son $500 because he had to throw out all of his food because they didn't have electricity for a week. That's a long time for food to just sit there. Of course, it was in the 90s too, so his food fermented just like my apple cider did. Damn it.
You might suggest that he gets a generator like a broken my house.
That would be kind of interesting, but at the same time, he lives in an apartment upstairs.
make it very small,
I'm not exactly
so
sure.
the
but-
neighbors don't complain.
Yeah, that's, generators are kind of loud and irritating. And of course, how frequently is he going to need the generator?
On a yearly basis. Barbara gets hers ready every single year. And she said this year has been a replay of a series of hurricanes a number of years back. And she says, like, as soon as one hits, there's 2 to 3 more behind it.
Right, yeah, the same thing happened, let's see, when my daughter was in Boca Raton about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it hasn't happened in the last 15 years.
Bruce, I have one more question.
This isn't about generators, right?
No. No, it's in terms of being a good observer. As far as, okay, so when you talk to a person, is it, and you're observing, you know, obviously not just the person, but the environment around you. Well, maintaining eye contact, say you're face to face with a person, would it be, I don't know, I guess the situation would dictate as far as looking a person in the eye at the same time, but also observing like what they're doing at the same time. Okay, so
Right.
if we're having a conversation.
Exactly.
And then you're constantly looking away, doing this, and observing what you're doing or what you're,
Right.
you know, taking notes on you or whatever.
Sure.
Would that make a person feel uncomfortable as far as doing it in front of them? Like, if we're looking eye to eye and you're looking straight at me,
Right.
and I constantly, you know, if I'm observing and kind of recognizing what you're wearing
Right.
or what you're doing with your hands,
Right.
how would you recommend, or what's your advice on taking notes, I guess, or taking notes mentally inside?
Peripheral vision.
Yeah,
That's-
peripheral vision,
Yeah.
basically.
See, I can see your feet right now. I can
Mhm.
see your hands. I'm looking at your face, but I'm seeing the rest of you as well. And so I'm reading you. Not only that, but I can see what Curtis is doing over here in the corner. You know,
Mhm.
so you know, yeah, I can. Edison's waving at me. Yeah, there we go. Yolanda's over here waving at me too. But Steve, it's opening your mind to accepting all the cues that you're getting.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, you have to think about, you know, your mind can only concentrate on one thing. Like, you know, I believe it was social psychology where you said that, you know, your mind is only concentrating on, fixating on one thing, and that's it. Everything else, people who say they're multitasker are basically liars.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, if I'm talking to someone,
It's a good point. That's an excellent point.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Your mind can only do one thing at a time. So while I'm reading, while I'm listening to what you're saying, all of this is going into my short-term memory, and probably most of it's just going away. This isn't something that I have to worry about, unless it is a telltale gesture, and then, you know, I'm reading that telltale gesture. I've got all this information in my mind. I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm registering whatever this gesture is. You've got your feet, you know, pointed inward rather than, they're not straight. You know, and I noticed that when you first started talking. You ever?
No,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that, this could probably be working both ways.
Right.
Within, talking to people. And it could be misleading as well.
Right.
First of all, you as a listener, can be able to stand there and basically just absorb everything that's being said
Right.
and things of that nature. However, on the other perspective, the person that you're basically speaking to might be in a position to where they're taking things in a different manner based on their facial expression. Reason being is because I used to work with kids,
Mhm.
and we used to work with individuals that were pretty much at risk, dealing
Right.
with drugs,
Sure.
alcohol, and so forth.
Right.
So this was a case scenario with this particular individual. Parent had come in, we were basically in the process of expressing how we had come across this case scenario as far as how the student was caught with a certain amount of drugs and so forth. So that information was pretty much expressed. Mom, however, on this side, she was in a position where she was already agitated,
Mhm.
simply because it was probably the first time offense for her child.
Right.
So she came in and she was pretty much overprotective of her
Right.
child.
Sure.
And so she was going naughty, saying everything she wanted to say on her
Right.
behalf. So I was just standing here, just absorbing everything, listening
Right.
to everything, and not wanting to say anything, and just letting her basically express what she wanted to say.
Right.
So within that time, my facial expression was just all in a calm, how would you say, it was in just not so much stern, but basically in a frozen aspect as
Right.
to where you're listening,
Mhm.
not with any movement.
Right.
I had that ability of wanting to respond back to her
Right.
immediately in a professional manner. I already had my ducks in line as to what I was going to say and so forth. And all of a sudden she stops and then she looks at me and she goes, "You better wipe that smirk off your face." She says.
Exactly.
It wasn't anything like that.
Right.
It was
Certainly not.
just, I was just so in a position where I was wanting to step up and basically
Right.
express to her in a professional manner
Right.
as to how things have come about and stuff like that. So after she said that, I respectfully said, "Ma'am, I said, I'm sorry that you feel that way. However, I said, you're misunderstanding the basically concept of what
Right.
you're accusing me of at this point."
Right.
I said, "I'm sorry that you feel that way, however, this is just how I look."
Right.
In reality, that misconception of basically how I look kind of took a strain on her.
Right.
She took it in a different manner as to where she thought I was laughing at her and stuff
Sure.
like that. But in reality, it had nothing
No.
to do with that. So I had to calm her down, and myself and the other staff members had to sit her down, but we were able to kind of control the situation, calm
Right.
her down, and we were able to deal with that case scenario.
Right.
So, like, that's what I meant. It could-
Exactly. And the reality is she's defensive. She's extremely defensive. So no matter what look you had on your face, she is going to read it defensively. And you really had no choice. You know, she's going to see it as a smirk, as a smile, as judgmental.
That's just how some people.
Exactly. And the next time she came in, she probably wouldn't have reacted the same way because she wouldn't have been so defensive. But yeah, it's an excellent point, Edison. Thank you.
The good thing was that you didn't get mad or
Oh, yeah.
anything.
Right.
Your approach was very professional.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's all you can do. It's a very, and that's another class. We're going to talk about how dangerous domestic disturbances are. So many policemen, it's the most dangerous thing a policeman can do is to step into a domestic disturbance because everything's emotional. He's supposed to control it. Whereas they were both firing at each other before, not guns of course, but verbally. Now all of a sudden they've got a new target. Two people have a new target or more, and of course the policeman becomes the target. So it's very dangerous, and you were in that kind of a situation as well. And so you suddenly became the target. She wanted to make you the target rather than her son, who had just done something he shouldn't have done. Thank you for that. That's an interesting observation. I appreciate that. Eye movement and eye contact, are they looking mostly at the floor? Just what are they looking at? Are they looking mostly at the ceiling? Are they looking around the room? Are they looking directly at another person? Are they staring at a specific thing? Most people find it painful to stare at somebody for an extended length of time. They just can't do it. They have to look away or blink. Or blink. So if they're staring, this is really kind of odd. I was working in a pediatrics clinic in Virginia, and we had this one girl that would come in, and she had really big eyes, and she always stared at people. She stared at people, and she was a teenager. She was like 12 or 13 years old. People thought she was either on drugs or she was trying to seduce them because she looked longer than she was supposed to. Okay, all right. Okay. If you look at somebody too long, it's like you're trying to communicate with them. And she would do this. And she got into all kinds of interesting trouble because she looked at people too long. And the reality was she had Asperger's syndrome. And so she didn't know what appropriate was. Appropriate didn't really register in her mind. But she had these really huge eyes. And men thought that she was trying to seduce them, despite the fact she was only a 13-year-old girl. It was really kind of unnerving, though. I'd have to draw her blood, and she would be making eye contact with me the whole time. And, you know, it's almost hypnotizing, trying to draw this lady's or this little girl's blood, and she's staring into my eyes like I'm the most handsome man in the world. So my interpretation was that I'm the most handsome man in the world. She couldn't take her eyes off me. I'm kidding. I'm not that deluded. I could be, though. Body position, how are you sitting? Are they leaning back? Are they slumped over? Are they slouched? Are they upright and stiff? Are their legs crossed? Are their feet flat on the floor? Are their legs curled under? Are their legs crossed? Are their ankles crossed? All of these things you need to notice. And of course, that's what I was doing with Aaron. He had his feet flat on the ground, but they were pointed they were toed in rather than straight. They were kind of toed in, just a little bit. And I noticed that for one reason or another. Not important, but the reality is that we need to read all of these things. If somebody's in a slouch position like this, could mean depression, could mean that they're relaxed. If they're stiff, if they're sitting straight and they're stiff like this, it may mean that they're nervous. It really all depends on what is being said. So these are things that we need to observe. Are their feet flat on the ground, or do they have their ankles crossed? Most people have something crossed. Ankles, knees, ankles, 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 ankles. Your feet are flat on the ground. So that, you know, if we look around the room, we can see that some people have their feet flat on the ground, and other individuals have something crossed, usually their ankles or their legs. Body movement, did they hardly move at all? Did they move slightly? Did they fidget most of the time like I do? Me playing with my keys almost constantly. For one reason, these are my house keys. I'm not sure what that's all about. Did they nod their head or swing their legs? Did their movement change during the interchange? And of course, as I was telling you about that first lady that I counseled, her movement was probably the most important thing about her. That told us, me, didn't tell the guys that were supposed to be teaching me how to counsel. It told me that she was trying to distract me with her gestures. And of course, this is a really good way for a female like that to distract males, because we are easily distractible. We're not real bright. We only think in one direction almost all the time. And anyway, and it did work to some extent. Of course, here I am covering myself up, trying to protect myself from her blatant sexuality. Breathing pattern, did their breathing seem normal? Did they often sigh? Did they take deep breaths? Did they breathe in a shallow way? Shallow breathing usually means anxiety or nervousness. Deep breathing can mean not really depression, but sadness. They're sighing. You know, all of these things are taking place. So it really all depends on the situation and what's being said as to how their breathing pattern will affect what you have to say. Muscle tone, are their fists clenched? Is their jaw tightly closed? Are they slumping? Is their face slack? Has their muscle tone changed during the interchange? My face is an open book. It really is. If I'm pissed, my jaw is tight. I got my teeth clenched. So if I'm sitting there and I'm listening, usually it's the administration, no offense to the administration, of course, but usually it has something to do with the administration saying something like, you've got to work on Friday, and I'm thinking, oh man, I was going to go to Albuquerque this weekend. So yeah, so you can really tell I get really upset. And it's all in my face. Everything's in my face. There's no reason for me to hide anything at this age. I'm way too old to be hiding things. Gestures, what were they doing with their hands? Did their hands stay in their lap folded together? Were their hands moving around most of the time like mine do? Were their hands in tight fists? Did they make circles with their arms or hands? Did they show their palms? Really kind of interesting. Like I have been telling you. I just went to my 50th high school reunion. Kind of interesting. It turns out that I make more hand gestures than anybody else in my class. You know, these are people from Indiana, and they're mostly German and English, of course. And I've been all over the world, and some places, if you don't make hand gestures, people don't listen to you. So I have learned that in my 67 years, or my 50 years away from high school. I've learned that, so now I make a lot of hand gestures. And my dad commented on this before he died, not just before he died, oh, my son. He told me this. He said, you know, my dad was kind of funny. He didn't like jokes. He didn't like humor. He was kind of funny that way. But he liked to sit around the table, and of course we'd be bantering back and forth with me and my brothers and sisters. And I was always the funny one, of course. I was always the funny looking one anyway. And he said, you know, you move too much. That's what he said to me, because I make hand gestures and whatnot. And my brothers and sisters, they don't do that. They're English. They're more English. They're Hoosiers. They don't make hand gestures. And evidently I'm not a Hoosier anymore because I move my hands too much. Way, way too much. Anyway, my dad made that observation. Very, very astute fellow. Skin tone. Did you notice any change in skin tone, of course? And if you get embarrassed, your face turns red. I've been embarrassed in a long time. It's like your face flushes, it gets hot, and you get embarrassed. As confusing as that, it's like a hot flash. My wife has hot flashes all the time. And tells me about it every time. Like it's my fault. I don't have anything to do with her hot flashes, I don't think. Or maybe I do, maybe it's my fault. She's having hot flashes. When in group therapy situation, it is important that the practitioner observe everyone in the group. Now this is really kind of hard, because it's hard for me to see everything. I can see general gestures, but I can't really see if your face is turning red, if you're looking depressed. You know, if I'm looking at Aaron, I can't see everybody else. All I can see are generalities as far as that's concerned. And for that reason, usually in a group therapy situation, there are two observers. One of them is talking and the other person is observing. But of course, they're both observing at the same time, because they want to understand not just what this guy's doing, but they also need to know what she's doing or what he's doing. You need to see how they're reacting to what other people are saying. One person needs to concentrate on the speaker, and the other individuals need to observe what's going on in the rest of the room. When the practitioner scans the group, it also encourages the speaker to speak to everyone, not just the practitioner. And this is one of the things that is fairly common in a group counseling session. I'm talking to Curtis, and he's the observer, so I'm focused on him, and I'm not seeing anybody else. And of course, that's not what we want. We want group interaction. We want everybody to be part of the whole thing. So if the observer, if the practitioner is the one that's looking around the room while somebody is speaking, it makes Curtis not just speak to me, or me just speak to Curtis. It makes Curtis speak to everybody, or me speak to everybody, depending on which one of us is the practitioner. Did you get that? You're the practitioner? Okay. Okay. I'm the screwed up guy, okay? Often in a group situation, there will be two leaders, and the two can trade off assignments of observation. This is what I was saying. It's very good to have two observers. And this is how they trained us when I was going through counseling. Not going through counseling. When I was being trained to be a counselor, they trained us using two observers. And of course, that was the session that I was talking about. There were two observers. One was videotaping, and the other one was theoretically watching. And of course, the guy on the video camera, all he was doing was focusing on this lady's body parts, rather than her face or what she was saying. I don't know. It was really.
So you got seduced, huh?
He did. He really did, and he missed it completely. She just shot him completely down. She was in complete control of this guy, because he was watching her knees, he was watching her breasts, he was watching her flip her hair, you know, the whole thing. And of course, I'm observing the same thing, of course I'm protecting myself at the same time, and I was hoping that they were going to give me all this really good feedback. Nothing, they gave me nothing. Absolutely nothing. They didn't read any of this stuff as a negative, you know, "Oh, she's just moving," you know, that kind of stuff. No, she was trying to seduce me. She was trying to seduce all of us. And it pretty much worked. The individuals that had the best insight were the females that were observing what was going on after they watched the film. They were the ones that gave the best insight. It is necessary to observe the people in large groups. This can be done by looking for telltale actions of individuals or groups and individuals. Are they fidgeting? Is their facial expression incongruent to what you're saying? And of course I look at everybody to see if Curtis is on his phone. You know, I look at this kind of stuff because it tells me whether he's really interested in what the hell I'm saying. And the reality is he already knows all this stuff, so he can go ahead and check his phone if he wants to. Are their shoulders hunched? Are their mouths pinched? And this is what I do. This is why you need to look at me when you're trying to tell me something. If I'm pissed, my jaw's tight, my lips are pressed together really tightly. And I'm trying to show you that I'm pissed off without saying, "You dumb shit, why in the world are you giving me bad news?" Your eyes are closed. I have to go to, we have a faculty day on the 6th of October. So, damn it, I have to go to, I have to drive to Shiprock. Probably be snow on top of the mountain when I have to get down. I have my little red car. Goes really fast, but it also slips and slides on ice and snow. Attending involves being totally focused on the client. And of course, that's obvious. She's looking in her eyes. Attending isn't as easy as it seems. Often when we are listening to someone, we are hearing what they are saying, but we are trying to compose what we are going to say when they stop speaking, when it's our turn to talk. So you're not really listening to them, you're composing something brilliant in your mind. Theoretically. I do this all the time. I'm sorry about that. So if you ever come in to talk to me, half the time I'm thinking about some brilliant thing I'm going to say next, which usually isn't very brilliant at all, unfortunately. But this is what attending is all about. This is a culture, a select culture, where you make direct eye contact. There are cultures where you do not. Usually with American Indians you don't. Aaron and I are both military, so we do make eye contact. Concentrate on, yeah, I know. It's because of our military background. My God, if you don't look the sergeant directly in his eyes, and he knows you're not listening to him, and then you get in trouble. Isn't that the way it works? Unless you're standing at attention, in which case you better not be looking him in the. Are you eyeballing me, boy? Yeah, that kind of thing. My TI was about 5'4". He was Hispanic. And he would yell at people for eyeballing him because he was this tall, you know, so you're always looking over his head. And if you're looking down at his eyes, then you're eyeballing him. He didn't like that at all. A little bitty guy. Got in trouble a lot with my TI. You guys have DIs though, don't you? Yeah, drill instructors. Okay. Well, there are some cultural differences in the way that someone shows attending. For the most part, it is shown by leaning slightly forward in a relaxed, comfortable position, sitting in an open and accessible way, and your face expresses appropriate concern. Okay, that's what I was trying to do with this lady. That's why my legs were. I wasn't trying to seduce her. I was trying to show her that I was open to what she was going to say. I was leaning forward in the beginning, and then as she started doing things, I moved farther and farther back, and of course, all of a sudden I'm covering myself up. I was trying to attend to her, but the more I attended to her, the more I got seduced, so it was really kind of an odd situation. Why don't we stop right here and we'll pick this up next time. Sorry about the story about my lady friend. Wow. wow. You know, I've been married to women that didn't show me as much stuff as that lady did. It was something else.
So through counseling, did you find out like if she was, when she was growing, you said she was daddy's girl.